Join me on this 11 miles kayak on the Severn River from Worcester to Upton-on-Severn on the 3rd of April 2025. Learn about the history of Worcester, an ancient city on the banks of the Severn. See how I got on with the Hiqmar e-fin electric motor that I had fitted to my kayak for this trip. Find out what it's like paddling on the Severn, the longest river in the UK, and discover the quaint little town of Upton-on-Severn with its period architecture. This 11 miles kayak on the Severn River in Worcestershire took me from Worcester to Upton-on-Severn. I launched from Worcester at 11:30 am and paddled past the historic city centre and Worcester Cathedral. I continued downstream passing the village of Kempsey. After passing Cleveload and Severnstoke, I landed at Upton-on-Severn at 4 pm. I'm at the bus stop in Upton-on-Severn outside of the White Lion Hotel waiting for the bus 363 to Worcester, and on cue here it comes. I'm at Worcester on the right bank above Worcester Bridge, inflating my Story inflatable kayak with an electric pump. I had the usual pre-launch photo on the bank with my Story Division 1 inflatable kayak. I had originally planned to launch from the left bank below the railway bridge, however the water level was quite low and was a couple of feet below the concrete embankment there, and I was worried that I'd flip my kayak trying to get into it. Therefore I decided to go across to the right bank where I could see a shallow bank sloping down towards the river. I paddled downstream underneath Worcester Bridge, which as usual was busy with traffic. It's believed that there's been a bridge crossing the Severn River at Worcester since medieval times. During the Roman period, Worcester emerged as an important settlement on the Severn River, connected by the river to the forts at Gloucester and Wroxeter. Worcester became a central town in the Anglo-Saxon Kingdom of Mercia. Parts of Worcester Cathedral date back to 1084, although it's been significantly added to since. I kept over towards the left bank to avoid disturbing the large flock of swans centred around the swan sanctuary over on the right bank. I'd seen what those swans could be like when I'd fed them on a previous occasion, and I didn't fancy being capsized by a flock of swans in the first half a mile of the trip. The area around Worcester Cathedral comprises a labyrinth of streets littered with historic buildings. Worcester was laid under siege a couple of times by parliamentarians during the English Civil War. The Battle of Worcester in 1651 took place in the fields a little to the west and south of the city, near to the village of Powick. There is a great Belgian beer cafe called Triple B in Worcester, and I was looking forward to visiting it again for a post-paddle beer later that evening. There's nothing better than rehydrating with a few strong Belgian beers after a hard day's paddling. I turned on my Hiqmar e-fin kayak motor as I paddled downstream through Worcester. The motor slides into the skeg slot on the hull of the kayak, and you connect it via the cable to the battery which you put on the floor of the cockpit of the kayak. You turn it off and on and control the speed by using a wristband which connects wirelessly to the motor. That red barrier on the right hand side cordons off Diglis Weir, and on the left hand side you've got Diglis Lock. I'm going to get out on this shallow bank on the right hand side, a couple hundred metres above Diglis Weir, and portage around the weir. I managed to get my kayak and all of my gear up the bank and onto the path. Unfortunately I didn't realise that those were stinging nettles. I'm just below Diglis Weir. I had hoped to launch from this viewing platform here, but unfortunately the water level's too low. I've had to carry my gear a couple hundred metres further downstream where I can launch back into the river on this shallow bank. I was just talking to that guy in that motorised white dinghy up there, and he's come up from Upton-on-Severn by coincidence. I'm back on the water just below Diglis Lock. I'm exhausted after carrying my kayak and my gear a few hundred metres along the bank. I should have brought my kayak trolley. That looks like a place where you can get back onto the water just below Diglis Lock if you portaged it on the left hand side. Diglis Island was created by the construction of Diglis Weir and locks in the first half of the 19th century. You can portage Diglis Weir and lock on either side of the river. As shown by this red line, I got out on the right bank just above the orange barrier, carried my gear a few hundred metres alongside the riverside footpath and put back in below the weir. Alternatively, as shown by this yellow line, you could get out onto the pontoon just above Diglis Lock on the left bank, walk along the path and put back into the river downstream of the lock and weir. On reflection, I would have taken the left bank route around the lock, which would have been a shorter portage than going down the right bank around the weir. You can hear the hum of my kayak motor in the background. There's a boat coming upstream, so I better keep to the right side of the river. The Hiqmar eFin kayak motor has 3 modes which are operated via the wireless remote control wristband. Drive mode is the one that you'll use the most, and this propels you along at about 2.5 miles per hour or 4 kilometers an hour. The battery will apparently last about 4.5 to 5 hours in drive mode. Sport mode propels you along at about 4.5 miles per hour or 7.5 kilometers an hour. The battery will last between 1.5 to 2 hours in sport mode. Finally, reverse mode propels you slowly backwards. I do use reverse mode occasionally when I need to back out from somewhere. I approached the village of Kempsey with its 15th century church of St Mary the Virgin. The church was apparently built on the site of an Iron Age fort which was later occupied by the Romans, and subsequently was an Anglo-Saxon monastery which was sacked by the Danes. While I generally still paddled in addition to using the motor, at times I revelled in the fact that I could do some filming, take photographs, have a drink, and even have my lunch break, whilst the motor still kept me cruising along the river. Having a kayak motor is, I guess, similar to having an electric bike. I passed the hamlet of Cleveload on the west bank, which is the site of a former ferry across the river. The Severn River is the longest river in the UK, being 220 miles or 354 kilometres long. It flows from its source in the Cambrian Mountains in Wales all the way down to the Severn Bridges, by which stage it widens out into a huge estuary. We're uploading videos of our trips along the Severn River to the Severn River playlist of our YouTube channel, and uploading blog posts to our Severn River page on our website. There's a public right of navigation on the Severn River from Pool Keir near Welshpool down to Stourport. From Stourport to Gloucester, including the section between Worcester and Upton-on-Severn that I was paddling this day, a waterways licence is required. The best way to get the required waterways licence is either by joining Paddle UK or Paddle Cymru, since membership includes the licence. On this trip I used a Story Division 1 kayak, which is a full drop stitch 3-panel inflatable kayak. The Story Division 1 kayak is quite fast, especially for an inflatable kayak, due to the full drop stitch construction, the V-shaped hull and the hard plastic ribs on the bow and stern, which help it to cut through the water. It's not as stable though as some of the other inflatable kayaks that I have. It's okay though for flat water cruising on canals and rivers, and also on sheltered parts of the coast or estuaries. With these 3-panel canoe-shaped full drop stitch kayaks like the Story, you have to be quite careful to spread your weight when getting into and out of the kayaks, because if you put too much weight onto one side, then they can flip over, as I found out on one occasion when I was on the Ely River in Cardiff. I've done a full review of the Story kayak on the product reviews playlist of my YouTube channel and also on my website. The paddle with the blue blades is a Werner Kamano 250cm long paddle. I went for a long paddle because many of the kayaks that I use are quite wide inflatable kayaks. I found it to be a superb low angle paddle suited to flat water cruising, which is generally what I do. You can check the water levels for the Severn River before you plan your paddle on the River Levels UK website. The gauging stations relevant to this route are the ones at Worcester Diglis and at Kempsey Yacht Club. The water level at the Worcester Diglis gauging station was about 0.55 metres on the day of my paddle. The level at the Kempsey Yacht Club gauging station was 0.66 metres. This was relatively low for these gauging stations, so the water level was fairly low and towards the bottom of the green or normal range. On the sections of the Severn River between Stourport and Gloucester, low river levels are not such an issue though, as on some other rivers such as the Wye, because the weirs tend to regulate the levels and keep them relatively deep and the river slow flowing, even when the water levels are quite low. Upton-on-Severn loomed into view downstream. I planned to land on the right bank just upstream of Upton Bridge, where there are some pontoons. Upton-on-Severn is Worcestershire's smallest town. It has a lively waterfront with riverside pubs, gardens, half-timbered buildings and Georgian streets. The large tower comprises the remains of a demolished 13th century church, topped by a copper cupola, with the result that it became known locally as the Pepper Pot Tower. I'd stayed in the White Lion Hotel in Upton-on-Severn the night before, with parts of the building dating back to 1510. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then please give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing by clicking on the left below. Click on the right below to see videos of my other trips along the Severn River.